Beef of Boys Like Girls, also studio musician for people like Taylor Swift and Chris Daughtry. Beef has broken his neck, come back from the brink, and is someone who embodies martial arts and physical health to stay strong so he can continue to do what he loves to do. He plays in the band Boys Like Girls for nearly 20 years. And if you've watched any of his performances, plays huge drum sets and smashes hard, but also maintains an incredible physicality with strong ergonomics. This was a very engaging conversation that went a lot of different directions. Extremely excited about it. And if you're listening to this for the first time, my name's Brandon, Drum Mechanics Podcast. If you go to drummechanics.com/drumforever, I have a fitness program that's extremely inexpensive just for drummers to help you play forever. Use the code DRUM50 to get 50% off, making it for $750 for your first month. But please enjoy the podcast, and here is Beef of Boys Like Girls. Mr. Beef, welcome to the Drum Mechanics Podcast. Thanks so much for being here, man. I know we were chatting a little bit about some injuries you've had and some physical stuff that you've really embraced over the years, and you're an incredible drummer. So I'm really excited to chat with you today.
Thank you, Brandon. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm a big fan. I've seen a lot of your podcasts, and what you're doing is significantly different as far as teaching, and I'm excited to be here. So thank you.
Yeah, well, I mean, as you know, over the years, I've worked with a lot of professional athletes before coming into the drum world, and I just started seeing in the drum landscape there were a lot of really common injuries that could have been avoided just by changing things, learning a little bit more about biomechanics, and getting stronger. And what's really great about all of that is I'm discovering people like yourself who really have embraced a physical, healthy lifestyle, and it's carried all the way over to the drum set. I mean, the reason I want to talk to you before we chat was I saw your performance on Drumeo, and your physicality on the drum set while maintaining control was really remarkable. Like, you're playing with very powerful grooves, keeping incredible time, but you have such an incredible physical presence, and I can see it in your shoulders. You got massive shoulders, man, which comes from your wrestling world.
Yeah. So we spoke about this briefly. I was injured years ago. I think it was like 7 years ago. About 10 years ago, I started training jiu-jitsu and wrestling, and I had just won the world championships, and I got my blue belt, and I went home and was wrestling with somebody that was like an NCAA guy, and he jumped guard had a guillotine, and when he jumped guard, the guillotine, I fell, and my head landed sort of sideways. I don't know if you've ever gotten what people will call it like a stinger, right? So your head sort of jerks sideways. It was a little worse than that. So to relieve the pressure of the strangle, you jump over the body, and you relieve the pressure. So I was able to jump over the body, but my neck had been tweaked, and it was really bad. I was like, like this really, really hurts. And I went home, and I thought it was, maybe like a stiff neck. So of course, I went back to the gym the next day, and I trained, and I was pinned in a cross-side position, and someone had a cross face on me. So my neck was like this, and I was like, stop. Like, this is really weird. I don't feel very good. I went home, took a nap, and I woke up, and it felt like my left arm was completely numb. So I thought, when you sleep on your hand or something like that, and you wake up and your hand's a little numb, it was like that, but it was my whole arm. And I'm like, what is going on here? So I used my other hand to pick up my arm, and then I started hearing a ringing in my ears, and I've never felt pain like that in my life. So I started sweating profusely, and I think I was in some sort of shock at that moment. So I got in my car and drove to the hospital, and it was a stick shift, which is kind of crazy. I went to the hospital. Yeah, this is crazy. And they're like, yeah, it looks like you just have a stiff neck, and it wasn't a very good hospital. And I was like, okay. So they give you a bunch of drugs, And I went home and I slept basically for 2 days on whatever drugs that they gave me. So home is Boston. Right now I live in Nashville, and at that time I was living in Los Angeles. So I hop on a plane, I go to Los Angeles, and this thing is just miserable. I'm talking like I barely can like lift my arm up, and it's immediately like atrophy is setting in. So I see a doctor, and he does some tests where they push on your hands and whatnot, and I just had no power at all, no strength in that left arm, and it was, my God, it just radiated through my whole body. So he goes, we need to bring you to get an MRI and an X-ray, and upon doing that, he said, you need to go to Disc. It's called Disc in Marina Del Rey, and they'll do some tests and stuff like that. They did tests, and they said we need to get you in immediately. If an ant farts, you're going to be paralyzed. So it was very, very scary, very, very scary. And so I went in, and they did a microdissectomy with a spinal cord decompression, which is basically they go in through the back of the neck. It was my C6 and my C7 were pushing into my spinal cord, the vertebrae, and basically started to sever my spinal cord. So I was 2 millimeters away from being completely paralyzed.
Jeez.
Very, very scary. The procedure doesn't take too long. Yeah. And it was pretty bad. So my neck was, it was scary. It was very, 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 very scary. I had a halo, the whole thing. And they said, hopefully your arm comes back. There's no sort of guarantees with any of this stuff. And make sure you do the physical therapy, all yada, yada, yada. And I was obviously pretty upset, but there we go. So that then I was on the journey to recovery from then on out. So I was bedridden for roughly 6 weeks. I couldn't really get out of bed or move. And then I started physical therapy slowly. I had an ice machine. I don't remember what they're called. That was on for 24 hours a day. And I brought myself to cryo twice a day. And I'm not a fan of the painkillers, so I tried to get off of those immediately. They make my stomach hurt, and you're constipated, and the whole thing. And I started using my fiance now, she was my girlfriend at the time, was like, let's use some CBD. And so we started doing the CBD. It got me off the pain meds right away, and the journey continued. So I was very, very scared, but optimistic that I wanted to be able to train and wrestle and do jujitsu, and I wanted my left hand back, and it was vital to go and do all the physical therapy and whatnot. Yeah. So very scary. The physical therapy was not incredibly hard, which is something, and I think people don't realize that those like little stabilizer muscles and stuff that you're doing bands and you're like, oh, this isn't really doing anything, but it makes all the difference in the world. So I was very, very vigilant in doing that, and it worked out. And I got my arm back and all the strength back, and did all the exercise and continued with the cryo and the cold tubs and all that stuff. And it worked wonders. My index finger and my thumb are still slightly numb. So getting back my left hand, not 100%, but I'm able to play, strengthening those, my shoulders and my, everything in my back basically really helped my neck. So That's kind of been the journey, and it was very, very scary getting back into grappling, and you just don't know. And then the doctor's like, you shouldn't do that. You could risk injury, and but it's a passion of mine, and it keeps my mental health, uh, in check, and my your ego in check, and all that sort of stuff. So I need that. It's super important to me, that, and obviously playing drums. So that's the short story of it anyway.
Well, Beef, I appreciate you sharing that and being so open just right up front with that. And the thing that I think a lot of young drummers or anyone that aspires and looks up to someone like you see these heroes of people that are playing in bands they like Boys Like Girls and whomever, and they don't necessarily realize the real human challenges that pop up from doing the things you love. I mean, most people struggle at one point with a major injury or something like that, and sometimes the cost is a little bit higher depending on what you do. If you don't mind me asking, I know you've been Boys Like Girls have been on the scene in a big way for nearly 20 years.
Hmm.
When was this, and how did that influence your touring, recording, or wherever you were at that time?
So we were off the road. So we from about 2005 to 2000, late 2009/2010, that's when we were just on the road, like nonstop. Those first two records, it was like, I think we flew like 300 days out of one of the years. It was crazy. Um, yeah, absolutely mental. We were just all over the place. And then third record came around a couple years later, and we switched gears musically. We had a record done, which not a lot of people know. Um, Martin had started working on this other sort of thing. He was getting sober and stuff, and it was a little crazy, but the idea was there, and it was sort of where I think we wanted to go. But we ended up putting out this record, Crazy World, which at the time, to be frank, was not necessarily the right record. And we put it out, and we did some touring, and it was just like, okay, I think this is time to take a break. And during that break is when I was like, I'm gonna start jujitsu. It's something I've always wanted to do. My older brother Dave has trained a bunch of guys in MMA, UFC, and Bellator, and he was an Olympic boxing coach, and so I've been around that sort of stuff and watching UFC one and all that sort of stuff, and I was fascinated by the grappling end of it, and wrestled a little bit in high school, but nothing too serious. And I went down that path, and I got completely addicted, as I do when it comes to like projects or anything. I'm just like, oh, I got to do it all. So I started training uh, 2 to 3 times a day, every single day. Just was like enamored by it, and I competed. 3 months in, I did the IBJJF Worlds, and I was the white belt world champ, which was still am.
Nice.
And I won, and it was super exciting. And I kept going, and 10 years later, I'm here. I've had the pretty much the same coach from the beginning, which has been really, really helpful. His name is Sean Williams. He's absolutely, like, when I say you meet people that are like unbelievable at what they do, this guy is like an anomaly. Like when someone you say is like a real master of their craft, like it's unbelievable. Like a person that can unscramble the egg and is an innovator in a field. So I got really lucky by being with Coach Sean or Professor Sean Williams, and the team Henzo Gracie. It's been quite the journey. So during that time, I was also doing for work. I was doing some studio stuff. I worked with Taylor Swift. I worked with Daughtry, Christina Perry, some Hannah Montana stuff, just a bunch of stuff doing playing drums, and then I was also doing film and TV, which I still do. Not quite as much right now, just because Boys Like Girls is very active. Boys Like Girls, then around 2016, we did a 10-year anniversary tour for the first record, and then we took, you know, 10 years off. So now we're back. We're back in it. So the last couple of years has just been like grinding, and we did 183 shows last year. Put out a record, did the whole thing. So that's kind of where we're at, and now it's the holidays and all that sort of stuff is just wrapping up, and we're getting ready to go again, doing fairs and festivals all this year, and then next year we'll see what we do as far as the 20-year anniversary of that first record.
Amazing. Well, when you're in Toronto, let me know, because I'd love to connect with you, and that'll be a real blast.
Absolutely, absolutely. We haven't done a lot of stuff in Canada, so as of recent, but I think we got some stuff on the books. We were chatting the other day about, man, we got to get to Canada. It's been a minute, so hopefully, I think over this next year we'll be doing some festivals and stuff there.
Now, you'd mentioned that from the neck injury, you did all the physical therapy, you kind of went all in, and you did all the small exercises, you did the cryo, you did everything you were supposed to do. When you started to recover and you were returning back to actually drumming, what kind of hurdles did you notice right off the bat recovering from a neck injury? And what kind of things did you do to help recondition yourself so you could play the drums at the level of intensity, consistency, and stamina that you were accustomed to?
Well, so I wasn't playing quite as much during that time. Like I took some time off. Like I was playing here and there. I just got back on the pad and started working on just your basics, you know, 8 on a hand, and playing with a metronome and trying to get my fingers back and all that sort of stuff. I do see myself, like, my posture getting better. I definitely sit lower for whatever reason, but that kind of changes. I feel that sometimes I'm sitting lower, and then I change my seat, and I'm like, oh, maybe I should be a little bit higher here. But if anything's bothering me, I make an adjustment right away. So I really try to listen to my body always. If something doesn't feel right, then I got to make an adjustment. And I think that's like across the board with anything. You really need to protect yourself. Drums is an occupational hazard, the constant slamming. And people say, like, oh, wow, you have a lot of power there. It's interesting, though. It looks like, I mean, there is a lot of power there, but I don't break cymbals, and I don't break drum heads, and it's maybe it's just experience or whatever, or it looks like I'm hitting super hard. I mean, I'm definitely hitting hard, but I think it's just maybe my posture. You would probably know a little bit more about this than I would, because of your field. But I think listening to your body constantly is super important. And if you don't change stuff up constantly, because you're always evolving as a player, or as a person, at least I sort of live by those rules. And I think if you don't listen to your body, then you can start getting in trouble. If you start feeling like, man, like my lower back is bothering me, or my feet hurt, or my knees are bothering me, or my arms are really bothering me, then you got to take an honest look and assessment of that and say, what am I doing wrong here? There's so much stuff out there too now. There's
Yeah.
so much information. Finding the right information and sifting through that can be difficult at times, but there is a lot of good information. And my biggest sort of takeaway from that injury is listen to your body. Don't overdo it. You overdo it, you're gonna be in pain. And make sure that you have some sort of recovery plan to feel better, because this can be brutal on the body. When I'm playing with Boys Like Girls, and I did that Drumeo thing, it's a little bit different. It's more of a physical, very physical style of playing. I still play physical at home, but it's a different thing. I'm using smaller sticks and smaller drums, and I'm still hitting the drums hard, but it's a different thing, completely different. And because if you're constantly playing like that, it's just eventually it's not going to be good. Things are going to start to bother you. So you got to be very careful, especially as we're getting older. So things I like to do is stay very hydrated all the time. I do a lot of amino acids, and I drink a lot of water. It's very, very important. I feel as though people are so unbelievably dehydrated. Yeah, although I am drinking coffee right now, but I do have my water jug, right?
Perfect. It's a
Do
big
have
one.
my
Nice.
water jug. Yeah, yeah. So I'm constantly trying to stay hydrated, and you know I eat pretty well. I probably could eat better sometimes, but I a lot of steak, and try to stay away from the bread and cookies and all the stuff in the middle of the grocery store as much as possible. But I like my sandwiches. So, but lots of ground beef and that sort of stuff.
You talked about, being able to modify yourself on the drum set when you're feeling things. And I think for someone like you, and I put myself in the same category, but you more so, when you do something like 100% intensity, like wrestling, jujitsu, right? You challenge yourself. It's all your senses going at one time. And then you're someone who practices studio musician work where you need full control of dynamics. Every limb, you need to be able to bring the intensity
Yeah.
of your hand up and down. You personally, more than I, but any studio musician who does physical things, you've really explored the continuum of physicality, like the extreme on one end and the finesse on the other. And this gives you a level of control and sense more so than just a regular drummer and just a regular fitness person, which is a really strong asset, in my opinion, because if you know what it feels like to have a part of your body not perform well or 100% when you're doing jujitsu, you can bring that level of control because your senses are so high. You can bring that level of control in a more closed environment, like when you're on the drum set. Like if you're looking at skill acquisition, there's open skills and closed skills. Drumming is a closed skill.
Yeah.
No one's going to come in and ruin your day. Jiu-jitsu is an open skill. Someone's going to come in and tear your head off, and it doesn't matter how skilled you are. And it's a big difference.
Yeah, that's absolutely true, and a very, very cool way to look at it. Yeah, there's well, the drum set could be an open skill. It could be because if you're fighting with them, you got to work with what you're playing, and if you're not, you're gonna have a hell of a time. You have to work with what you're playing. Um, and that can be detrimental to your success as a player, or if you're in the studio and you're just like they're like, hey, it's like, let's lay back here. So you got to work with the music and the producer and stuff like that, and that I believe is maybe an open skill, not to um, totally oops, hitting my drums. um, but yeah, but jujitsu is, yeah, you're with someone, you're wrestling. But I like to look at it, and this is something my coach taught me, is it like jujitsu is, and I think this goes pretty hand in hand with drums and music, is it shouldn't be an argument, it should be a conversation. So you should be having a conversation with your training partner, or a conversation with the other musicians in the room, because you're working together. So if it's like, this guy's like, hey man, like, let's play this, this funk thing, and you're sitting there like playing double bass, and like you're having an argument, like, let's
Yep.
lay in together, and let's listen to the vocalist, and play around that, rather than like, I'm going to be overplaying, which is super common and stuff when you're younger, and sometimes when you're older we like to do that. But I think having a conversation rather than an argument goes hand in hand with most things, and at least in my world. And that goes along with your body as well. If you're arguing with your body, like, oh, I'm going to hit this harder and hit this harder, and it hurts, so I'm going to do it again, and I'm going to get pissed off, and then you're having an argument, which is a bad one, and you're not going to win. So.
Before our podcast, I always ask everyone, and before I do this, is there anything that's taboo? And you said, how taboo are we going to get? And the reason why is because I've had many people who are very successful, busy musicians, and this actually started when I started working with NHL athletes, that people would be struggling or have something like a back pain or wrist pain or shoulder pain, and they didn't want to talk about it for fear of loss of their gig. Especially with some of these larger gigs, if they were struggling with back pain and they were a hired gun for a large gig, and the overseer in their world heard they had a back problem and they were concerned they weren't going to be able to keep up to the 3-hour show, they were feared that they were just going to be replaced. And in hockey world, same thing. Like, I have a Winnipeg Jets retiree that I work with regularly. He's an awesome guy, but he struggled with back pain when he was 27, and he pushed through it until he was 29. And then he had the disc rupture, gave him that stenosis on the spinal cord, similar to yours, got surgery, lost control of his calf. Even to this day, his calf is 2 inches smaller than the left side. And he lost his contract because he didn't take care of his back at that time. And so that's why I asked that question. But like you're saying, listening to the body is such a crucial thing, and it really takes a lot of confidence to be able to execute on that, especially if you're responsible for a single position like the drum set in a big gig. You mentioned listening to the body. Do you have a particular example of something that you find shows up more often than not, that you make an adjustment on the fly or on the drum set that helps you to manage it?
Yeah, on the fly, it's like if I'm really laying in and I find myself getting extremely tired or tight, I know that I should probably lay back because I'm not going to get through this set, right? So I think this is a lot to do with experience too. You know, like having experience and having gone through all those sort of things that can get in the way is yeah, I think you got to go through it. But to speak on what you were saying about some of your NHL athletes and drummers and stuff, fear of losing your gig, totally, you know, could be a problem, right? Because that's, you know, where you're making your money, and this gig is really good, and I don't want to lose it. It's a tough one. I I believe that you should maybe not give all the information to your boss there right away. If there's a way to get around that and fix the problems without it interrupting the job, then he doesn't need to know. I don't think that's a good idea, because people will just like, we got to replace this guy because he has a job too, and maybe he has a boss, the team owner, etc. So I would say you definitely listen to your body. Don't do any, you know, doing nothing is probably not the answer at all. Like, you really, there's so many variables. How bad is this? Where could this end up? You know, will I ever play again? If you're never going to play again, you got to think about how much time do I have? When, you know, when are we going to be off the road? Can I get some of this stuff fixed and come back? Can you find a replacement for yourself in the music? Hey, I have a friend, or my drum tech's going to fill in for me now, and be confident in your approach. I think that's very important. If you're just like, hey, I'm hurt and I might not be able to do this anymore, unless they're your really good friend, they got to find somebody else. That's just what it is. But giving too much and saying too much can be also a problem, because, you know, you will get replaced. You know, drums and, you know, bass players and guitar players, and everybody's replaceable to a degree. So you gotta. I believe that you should be careful of who you tell and keep that sort of stuff to yourself initially. It's nobody's business anyway, unless it's going to really impact, you know, if you're going into a game and you're just like, man, like we're in the world championships and your leg is slightly broken or something like that. And the doctor's like, hey, you know, you shouldn't play this game. You got to think about that sort of stuff. So the variables are very situational, I think. But yeah, I stand behind maybe not saying anything right away until you have the full scope and the picture, and taking action sort of right away with recovery is absolutely the most important thing. Because if you're never going to play again, or that's no good either. Or you get really good insurance too. Like if you if you know there's going to be some looming, like insure your arms if you're a drummer, or insure your body there. So because it is such high impact with some of this stuff, I think at some sort of level it would be smart to do. I remember my father was like, you should really insure your hands. What if you slip and fall and you can't play? And it's like, that's where that's your job. So lots of variables, I think, and keeping having an inner circle of people that you can talk to and that you trust, and whatnot, before making those tough choices of like, hey, I got to take a year off. Will I have my job when I come back? And being straightforward, honest, and confident in your approach, I think, is absolutely detrimental to staying successful.
It's a very interesting debate because I 100% understand the political position for sure. But I mean, you probably see this too from people who look up to you and ask for advice as they're coming up, at least as drummers, or I wonder if you do. Because you see, I mean, if you had a gig like Michael Jackson's gig or like some huge, huge, huge pop star, and you alluded that you had a problem, I could see, I can just swap him out for this person and they can fill it up and they're going to make it work because there's good money here and it's a good gig and they don't want to leave. But then at the same time, from other drummers or other people that are coming up, at least from my observation and conversations with pro drummers, it seems like touring drummers, I should say, it seems like that there's no conversation, or hasn't been, about the potential work hazard of being a drummer on the road. And then once you're in it, you start feeling some things and someone goes, hey, Beef, I got this thing going on. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh yeah, I had this too a few years ago. And you have to like almost get to a almost black belt to start discovering the problems. So I'm a big fan of trying to make sure that those conversations are up front. But at the same time, like you're saying, it's a difficult balance of like how much does one share at a high position to make sure that the people below them coming up are safe, but at the same time, they also secure their position.
Yeah, and you're 100% right. I think it's the music business is in particular is either the best business in the world or the worst one. So you really got to be careful. You really do. There's a lot of snakes in the grass. There's a lot of great people too, but what are you going to do if you find the opportunity? People, there's some good people and there's some bad people, but people are looking for the opportunity. They want your job. They want your job. Thankfully, I'm like a founding member of this, and Boys Like Girls. But if I'm out there touring and I see, friends and stuff, like, depends on your relationships. What is your relationship with the management? What is your relationship with Michael Jackson in that scenario? Like, are you good friends? Have you been there for a long time? If you just go into a situation, you're 3 months in, you're like, hey, am I going to have a job? My arm hurts. It's
Yeah.
like, what is your relationship? I think making yourself, um, creating undeniable value in all situations is important, particularly in music. How do you constantly grow musically? How do you grow mentally, physically, all that sort of stuff? But maintaining those political relationships are very, very, very important, because you won't have a job if you have a bad attitude. There's a lot of stuff that being a drummer or a bass player, or you got to deal with. You got to deal with all these personalities all the time, and pick your battles, and not die on some of those hills, which is just not worth it. Because we see it all the time. Bands break up because of this stuff. But as far as being like a touring musician, or part of that team, if you have a bad attitude, you're not going to get that job back. There's players that have been in bands for years and years and years, and they're not necessarily the best drummers or bass players, but they have a great attitude and they're great in a room and they're fun to be around. And that stuff is arguably has better value, unless, maybe you're Buddy Rich and you can throw, milkshakes at people, right? But still, I mean, that's his band. So finding that, I think in all facets of life, is with anything, is finding balance is going to be the key to all success. It's super, super important, particularly in those situations.
I have so much respect for anyone that does what you do because of what you just outlined, because it's not just drumming ability, like you said, but for everything to go forward, the consortia of ability, musicality, not even physical ability, but musicality, your health, your political diplomacy, how well you communicate, like all those variables need to be just perfect with the right perfect amount of people to make sure you can keep going a particular direction. And I mean, to be honest, I'm not trying to do that, but I'm an entrepreneur and I make all my income from my own work in my own building, and I have full autonomy of everything that goes on around me. It tells you I'm a bit of a control freak, maybe, but I have control there. But if something bad happens, I mean, I've got control of it. But if I were on the road, I mean, the anxiety it gives me thinking about, well, what if my hands don't work tonight? What if I'm tired tonight? What if I accidentally get sick? What if I'm in a bad mood? What if this happens? What if this person on stage drives me nuts? Like, it's so much. It's incredible. I mean, how do you have any particular strategies that you employ to balance all of it to make sure that it's not just drumming, but everything keeps going forward?
Yeah, you really got to do some mental work there, and try to stay relaxed and not freak out in those situations. And this is what martial arts has really done for me, and coaching guys and athletes and whatnot, is it taught me to stay relaxed, whether I'm training and I'm getting smushed, right? Or submitted. I never get submitted anymore, but no, I'm just kidding. Like, we all get submitted, but having that humility of tapping or whatever. But if, you're getting smushed and someone's got a lot of pressure and they're really going, freaking out in those situations is going to do what? It's going to make you tired, or it's going to put you in a bad spot. So sometimes relaxing, or all the time relaxing in those situations, is going to help you slow things down and then try to escape whatever sort of position you're in. And I think that goes hand in hand with some of the other, the variables of being in a band or being a hired guy. You really need to take a look at yourself in the bigger picture of things. Like, getting mad at somebody for drinking your soda or eating your ice cream is not worth the resentment, because they might you don't know what somebody else is going through in their life too.
True.
So having like some humility there. It's like when you go to the grocery store, or the DMV would be a good example, because that could be the worst, right? And they're just, yep, can I help? That you feel like there's like a little bit of an attitude, and you're like, oh my God, like, can you just have a smile on your face? You just don't know. You just don't know what people are going through. So if you can realize that and try to have a positive attitude and realize, okay, well, maybe I can just give a little bit more, because this is on me too, and try to do my best in the situation, and realize the bigger picture here. I think that's super, super important. Staying relaxed. If you have to step away, it's okay. But if you're shouting and fighting and doing all that sort of stuff, it doesn't typically work out in your favor, ever. You're better off taking a step back, collecting yourself, and realizing, again, the bigger picture.
Don't worry about the battle, but focus on the war.
Yeah, and it doesn't need to be a war either.
It's true.
It's like it doesn't. It can be very, very, very easy, or sometimes you have to just remove yourself. Some situations just aren't great.
Yep.
Sometimes you got to tap and say, my body hurts, or man, this is too much today. And that's totally okay. That's part of the, I guess, the journey of life in general. You know, you're going to go through stuff at, you know, your studio or, you know, doing fitness or whatever. Like there's some things you can't control. And I'm sure you've gone through it. Like if a tidal wave comes in and ruins all your gear, what can you control? Not a lot in that moment.
Yep.
Right. But what do? You got to rebuild, right? You got to rebuild. You're going to have to get all new gear and go through the insurance, and it's, you know, all that sort of stuff. So I think just having, you know, staying relaxed and looking at the things you can control and looking at the things that you can't control are vital in that journey, and keeping a good head on your shoulders there with that stuff.
So I'll sound like a shameless plug for a second, but you'll bear with me. For going forward, if a young drummer were to come to you and ask about what they can do to prepare their body, I tried to create this Drum Forever program. It's like $15 a month where we go over exercises to help drummers improve their body, resistance training, cardiovascular. Don't worry about that part. If someone came up to you and said, Johnny, say, Beef, I want to make sure that I improve my body as much as I can so I'm prepared for gigging and I don't want to get injured. They're brand new, up and coming. What kind of things would you recommend?
I would recommend a martial art, because that's what, you know, saved me. And I would recommend just, you know, being relaxed in general, I think is, which is hard, finding that balance. I would recommend your course or your online course, because I didn't even know about it. I think that's probably a fantastic sort of thing, but you're going to have to go through it. You know, you're going to have to find that's the thing. We're not always going to listen exactly. Sometimes you're going to have to go through getting injured and it's part of it. You either learn the hard way or the easy way. Unfortunately, when we're young, a lot of us learn the hard way. Try to get as much information as possible. Just, you know, try to stick with it. You're going to get frustrated, all that sort of regular stuff, but just stay the course. I think one of the biggest things that I see is, you know, motivation and, you know, where does that come from? And it has nothing to do with that. I believe that it's about staying consistent, but more dedicated. Like, I'm going to get up and I'm going to do X, Y, and Z, and have a plan, you know, write it down. I have to write stuff down. Like I really want to work on, you know, like shuffles, right? That I had a plan. I was like, man, you know, I don't do a lot of shuffles, and it's been a long time since I went down that road. So that's what I'm going to work on. I'm going to sit down every day, no matter what, at least for 5 minutes, at least. Okay. If I can maintain that, and I'm going to get better over time. I'm going to, right? So staying consistent and having that dedication and is super important to any growth. So yeah, I would say my best advice would be stay consistent and get up and do it. Like you got to do it. You're not always going to want to do some of the stuff. You're not. It's just the nature of being a player or a martial artist or anything. You just got to stay consistent. You really do. That's how we grow.
One of my mentors was a guy named Tom Purvis. He was one of the inventors of Bowflex. He helped design exercise technology for NASA. He's just like a brilliant engineer. Brilliant. He worked for Nautilus Exercise Equipment. But he has this quote that stuck with me. I learned it when I was 23. And it's basically what you're saying. It's motivation always leads to failure. It's about commitment. And the reason why is if you're committed, like for me right now, I'll be honest, I'm way better of a biomechanics specialist than I am a drummer. I've spent 20 years I've done 25 years of drumming, but I do 50 hours a week of this exercise thing. I'm trying to get my drumming ability up to make sure that I can at least speak the language on both sides so I can help more drummers. Every night,
Hmm.
I'm committed to being better. And even if I'm exhausted, tired, and sick, I still go to my practice room where I've got 45 minutes scheduled on my e-kit at 8 o'clock at night. And if I'm exhausted, I still go in the room. And even if it's only for 5 minutes, I make sure that I get in there and do something, because I know that doing something will be better than nothing. And when you're just motivation, there's just that, as you know, there's just kind of this emotional connection. Like, I feel like it, I'm going to do it today. And then I don't feel like it, I'm not. And then you just don't make progress. You get stuck.
Absolutely. My coach said, and I've heard this so many times, like, you can train, like, some coaches they'll say that, you know, you should train like 3 or 4 days a week and that's it. And then really listen to your body. And it's like, well, is that true? And now what is training, right? What is playing, right? How are we practicing?
Mm.
Um, if I thought playing was I'm going to sit down every day and run a boys like girls set, like my body's not going to be able to do that. It's just not going to happen. Can you play every day if you're exhausted? Yes. There's different ways to do exercises. There's tons of ways to do exercises. Are we thinking, or like if you just sat down at the drum kit and you're totally exhausted, your arms are burnt out, totally. Could you sit there and put up a, you know, piece of music and read through it and count through it? That counts, you know? It does. It counts. You're in there and you're learning. Are you playing? Yes, to a degree, you know? I think you can practice every day. You can play every day, and you should. Um, we're drummers. The good thing is like you can literally play everywhere. You can be on a plane, and you could be tapping in your lap, sight reading or learning, whatever. But to stay consistent in that, I've noticed the biggest improvement. If I don't play for a few days, I sit down and I'm like, my God, I feel like I went backwards. It's really, really strange. Like I've been redoing my studio here, which is my studio. When I say it's studio, it's a garage, and I had it painted, and I had to pull everything out, and I was like not playing and sitting at the drum set, but I was still learning outside. When I came back and sat down on the drum set, it felt a little funky, of course, as it normally does. But I didn't lose the other part, like the mental part of it, which is super, super important. So listen to your body, try to stay consistent. Motivation is definitely can lead you to failure. You're 100% right there, because we're not always going to be super motivated. But if you're dedicated, I'm going to get up. I'm going to do this. I'm going to sit down. I'm going to go in that room. You know, is important. It's important.
I always found, I mean, that's where I love the sports performance world and also bodybuilding world, is that both these different camps, and probably the same for martial arts. I've never done too much. You think of a bodybuilder, right? Everyone knows if you open men's health and fitness or women's health and fitness, right? There's a chest day, a back day or a leg day, or a lower body day and an upper body day and a rest day. And they periodize things so that way you can exercise X number of days in a row. Well, there's nothing wrong with, I'm going to exhaust my feet on double bass and do a 25-minute exercise until I can't move my feet anymore. That sucked. Next day, I'm going to do the same for my hands, but these are completely separate. And then day 3, I'm just going to practice counting rhythms to a metronome and trying to see, can I get my voice on time? You know what I mean? And you can just,
Yeah.
exactly like you're saying, it's just staggering it to make sure you have a plan to go forward. So I think I think it's brilliant that you just said that. I appreciate that so much.
Yeah. I mean, I truly believe that. In jujitsu, it's well, you can't wrestle every day, can you? Yeah, well, you can. There's active drilling. You don't have to go 1,000% every day. You don't. You
Yeah.
don't. Like active rest days is what we would call it, right? It's not a rest day. You're still staying active, right?
Yep.
There's always something you can do. You can call it a rest day. A rest day is sitting on the couch eating bunch of chicken wings and potato chips, and
Yeah,
being,
yeah.
I just don't, and it's fine to do that stuff too, but what's 5 minutes out of the day? What's 5 minutes?
I
What's
agree.
10 minutes? You know, um, so yeah, I'm definitely on the same page there with you on that.
Awesome, Beef. I got two more fast questions for you, and then we'll get you out of here back to your busy day and rocking out in that new cool studio. You mentioned that you've got some things you're working on right now on the drums. I'm just more curious, when you go to the drum set, what kind of things are you personally working on this day to improve? Is it the shuffles? Is it music? Do you have some technical things you're working on?
Yeah, so I've been really diving into the whole of recording and learning more about the engineering side and getting sounds and acoustics and all that sort of stuff. But I recently I was like doing the shuffle thing. Just going back to some of the basics, looking at some of my books and stuff from when I had first started, and I was like, man, like I never really dove that deep. And then finding a coach or a drum teacher again, and taking lessons and stuff like that has been sort of vital and on the list of things to do. I took a drum lesson, I think it was about a year ago, with this local guy. We traded a jujitsu lesson for a drum lesson,
Cool.
and it was an hour long, and it was just on the paradiddle. And I'm like, oh, like I can rip a paradiddle like all day long. He's like, well, cool. Let's displace the accents or whatever. And I was like, okay. Like I start doing. I'm like, man, I'm so used to doing this paradiddle where I'm going, accenting the first beat of it, and I'm not thinking about the second beat. Wow, that's a little bit difficult. And I just worked on it a little bit every day, and eventually it got there. So other things I'm working on are just I've been watching drummers like Aaron Sterling. I went and did a little lesson with him recently, and I was asking him about his what his approach is and stuff as far as songs and whatnot, and his the touch and the feel of things, and how he's coming to his parts and what his process is. So there's a lot of that. I think with that lesson in particular, it was we just sat. We didn't do any playing. It was we sat and talked about playing, and I think that stuff is very, very, very valuable. I think because of all the information that's out there, there's so many things that I'm like, man, like I see all these guys like ripping through these gospel chops. How do I do some of this stuff? And I'm like, man, like I've like pretty good technique, and like I studied and stuff growing up, but I never really dove down those linear sort of patterns and ripping through the drum set and what's going on there. So I started diving into that, and I was like, okay, I just get interested in it, and then I start working on it. And sometimes I just get in there and I start playing, and that's it. I try to stay consistent, but like anything else, as long as you get in there and you're trying to stay active, I think that's probably the first step. But having a plan and setting some goals, breadcrumbs though, I think is important. If you're just like, my God, I'm going to get up there and I'm going to sit down and I'm going to learn all of this stuff all at once, you're just going to 9 times out of 10, I think I'll be disappointed with myself, because it's not always going to happen right away,
Yeah.
especially when it's new. You don't know what you don't know, and it can get difficult. But just stick with it and try to you know give yourself a break. It's okay. Everybody fails at first, and then maybe you start failing less and less, and
You
that's
got to
okay.
fail forward.
Yeah, that's it. Sometimes you are going to take Yeah, sorry. Sometimes you are going to take fudge. Sometimes you are going to take steps backwards, and that's okay too. It really is. It's all part of the journey, and just sticking with it, trying to have a plan and try to grow.
Awesome. My last question for you, and I appreciate all the information you've shared. This has been a really engaging conversation. Is you've been playing, I mean, you do play big shows, right? You're playing long, heavy, hard hitting. You talked about hard hitting. Do you have any particular things that you do from a drum setup ergonomics perspective that you do to try and ease your playing so that way you can lay into it more and reduce the risk of injury?
Um, yes and no. Uh, that it's a tough one. I sit down, and if it feels comfortable and I can reach everything, everything's really sort of close to me. I'm playing big drums, so like I used to play a 26-inch kick drum and like a 14, like the Bonham setup, and like I was like, man, this is maybe just a little bit too big. My seat height and where the snare drum is, and relationships of where drums are super important. Like if I'm like reaching all the way back there, it's like this isn't going to feel good later,
Mhm.
um, it's being able to reach things pretty easily is very important. If I'm like up here, this is probably not a good spot for something. I should be able to hit things pretty close, and when we are playing those big shows, I want to be able to hear myself, and that's a big part of it. Like making sure you have good monitors, because if you can't hear yourself, you'll overcompensate completely. If you can't hear your snare drum or your kick drum during these shows, and this has happened to me many years ago, like I couldn't hear my snare drum, so I just started overcompensating, and I actually like popped my finger.
Oh, I
It
couldn't
popped
imagine.
out, and like I had to like pop it back in, one of those situations. But it's because you can't hear yourself. So make sure you have a good relationship with your monitor guy or your sound guy. It's very those guys can make your life awesome or hell. So that sort of stuff I think is vital.
Awesome. Well, Beef, listen, man, thank you so much for your time on all this. I mean, really going from the neck break to your recovery to how your approach to fitness and health, like, and martial arts, like really all of that was fantastic. I just can't tell you how much I am grateful for your time, man. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, and congratulations on all your success. I look forward to speaking again soon.
Yeah, lots of stuff coming. I'm excited, man. All right, man. You enjoy your day.
You too, brother.